I start the recording now.
Welcome everybody to the online seminar series, Machine Learning Needs Mathematical Optimization. Today we are very pleased to have Professor Emilia Gomez, who is a senior researcher at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission in Seville, Spain. And she is also a guest professor at the Music Technology Group of the Universitat Pompeu Fabra. Emilia leads the Human Behavior and Machine Intelligence teams at the Joint Research Center that studies the impact of artificial intelligence on human behavior. And this group is part of the newly created European Center for Algorithmic Transparency from the European Commission. Emilia has co-authored more than 300 peer-reviewed publications. She has supervised 15 PhD theses, and she has also contributed to a high number of funded projects in which she is the principal investigator for 4 of them. And in addition, she also has entrepreneurial expertise. She has received many recognitions for her research, her teaching, and her overall professional career. And for instance, she has been selected by the Commissioner Maria Gabriel for the EU Women for Future initiative in science, research, and innovation, as she has also been named one of the 100 billion women in AI ethics to follow in 2019. Emilia, we are extremely pleased of having you here. We know that you are a very, very busy professional, so thank you for making the time to be here. And for the audience, if you have a very, very urgent question, please put the question on the chat and I will read it for Emilia. Otherwise, we will have the time for questions at the end. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks a lot, Dolores, and thanks a lot to all for being here. It's a pleasure for me to give this seminar. I will share my screen now, and I think I will share the entire screen, and then I will show a little bit the slides that I have. Thanks a lot for the introduction as well. I saw other interesting seminars that you are having in this seminar series, so it's an honor for me to be here, although maybe my perspective might be a little bit different from other seminars that I have checked that are more focusing on specific scientific problems, and my work is more now in the science for policy domain, so I'm focusing mostly on regulation and policy, so maybe I wanted to talk also about this work and about the opportunities of this domain. So I titled my talk will be a very general talk about the challenges that we address in my team related to trustworthy artificial intelligence and how to define really methodologies, which are the scientific challenges, and also how these impact policy. And being this an European led initiative, I wanted to focus also on this European perspective. So I divided my talk into 3 main areas, and I didn't want to, I opted for covering many topics in a very superficial way, because I thought it was good to give you an idea of the kind of work that we do at my team, and also at the Joint Research Center. And then if there is more interest, I could develop more on some of the aspects. I wanted to introduce a little bit to our work, then to the European approach for trustworthy AI, and then give some examples of the projects we are working on. As Dolores mentioned, I have this interdisciplinary background. I'm an engineer, but I'm also a musician, so I have working for many years in the area of music technology, and I'm still affiliated to the Music Technology Group in Barcelona, where I have developed system for music recommendation and information retrieval, mostly based on audio, but also on video and music scores or lyrics. And for since now 6 years, I've been focusing more and more since I joined the Joint Research Center at the European Commission into analyzing more the impact of those algorithms on our decisions and also on our cognitive and socio-emotional development. I'm part of the Joint Research Center, which is the in-house scientific service of the European Commission. We are like independent support service. We provide somehow the scientific perspective and the technical perspective to the European policies. We are spread in 6 different countries, and my team is spread. I'm based in Seville, in Spain, but my team is based in Brussels, in Italy, and in Seville. And this is the work I will present here. Of course, we currently support 2 main policies that I will introduce later in the presentation. And this is a little bit what we do. We are an interdisciplinary team. So in the team, there are people from more a technical background like myself. We have cognitive psychologists also, or people in cognitive scientists. And then we have also some people working more in the legal or issues. And we try to build this gap between the concept of trustworthy AI, which is a very abstract concept, as you will see later, to a more engineering and practical methodology. So here I put a little bit the 4 components that we work, or the 4 kind of objects we work with: ethical guidelines, with legal requirements or legal text, with standards, which are technical documents, and also with engineering practices. And this is a little bit the work that we do. As Dolores mentioned, we are part of the European Center for Algorithmic Transparency, where we provide also support to the Digital Services Act, as I will explain later. This is our website, and you can find there also more information about our team and some publications that I will mention later in the talk. So the first thing that we do is that, when we work in this domain, we try to see AI or algorithmic systems as more socio-technical systems. So you will see through my presentation that when we work with algorithms, or we design algorithms, or we evaluate algorithms, this is our main focus: evaluation, design, and development. We mostly see a system as socio-technical systems. So we look, for instance, we define what we call use cases. We look at the context of use of the system, which is the intended purpose, the application areas, the target persons. So these are aspects that traditionally in the engineering field, or in the, for instance, machine learning fields, they are neglected. And this is precisely our focus, the machine learning pipeline, but from a user or human-centric perspective. So the second part before this introduction, is to have a brief overview to the European approach for trustworthy AI. I guess you have all heard about what is trustworthy AI. I will try to define in general terms what this concept means, and also which are the 7 requirements. And later on, I will try to provide some example of practical work we do on this concept of trustworthy AI. So trustworthy AI is a concept that was defined by the high-level group on AI. This was a group of experts from, I think there were 52 experts from academia, also industry, civil society, that were appointed by the European Commission to draft a series of recommendations about the use of artificial intelligence in Europe from 2 main perspectives. One is what we call the need for developing those technologies within Europe. This is called like the ecosystem of excellence, to have this and grasp the opportunities brought by artificial intelligence system. And then on the other hand, to draft a series of guidelines, so ethical guidelines on how this technology should be deployed or developed, so that those algorithms are safe and respect safety, mostly safety and fundamental rights. So this high-level group, of course, it was very diverse. So this was a very, very challenging task, but also very enriching, because there were people from different backgrounds, also from different viewpoints, and they drafted the concept of trustworthy AI. So you can find those guidelines. They were, I think, published in 2019, and you can find them in all European languages, also in the European Publication Office. And they designed 7 key requirements for artificial intelligence that should be continuously evaluated and addressed throughout the AI systems lifecycle. So those requirements should be somehow a criteria for the evaluation of systems, but from the design. So from the design to the deployment, and then to the monitoring of the system. So they define, the first one is related to the fact that humans should be able to oversight and have an agency into the AI systems that are developed. So the second requires more technical aspects of robustness, for instance, against intended or unintended modifications or attacks, and safety. So this is more related to maybe cybersecurity issues. So systems, to be trustworthy, they should be robust and safe. Then the third one is related to privacy and data governance. So a requirement for trustworthy AI is that systems should preserve or privacy, or should really respect personal data or not deal with personal data. The fourth is related to transparency in a broader sense. So it incorporates, for instance, explainability approaches that I know have been much discussed into the seminar series, or it also incorporates this more technical explainability, but also communication to users or documentation. Then there's a fifth that is much linked to fairness and bias and diversity. So this is also something that should be considered when developing an AI system. And finally, two that are more or less more broad, which are societal, environmental well-being, and accountability. So those, of course, if you see them, they are very abstract. They are also defined as ethical guidelines, so guidelines to be implemented into system, but in a very broad manner. In fact, those guidelines were complemented by a set of it's called ALTA. It's like it's assessment list for those requirements, and then developers or providers could go through these requirements and try to get a little bit an idea of how well they comply with the 7 requirements. This was in 2019, but after that, the European Commission published what we call a communication, where they expressed the idea of those 2 approaches that I mentioned earlier. This about fostering excellence in Europe on artificial intelligence, but also fostering trust. And they in this paper, it was presented the idea of the need for a regulatory frameworks to go from ethical requirements to legal requirements. So this should be not recommendations, but really legal mandate and legal requirements. In this sense, of course, the artificial intelligence have many challenges that are relevant from a regulatory perspective. I'm myself not a legal scholar, but I have worked in the last year a lot with legal scholars that are addressing this problem from a legal perspective. And these are the 5 aspects that they mention to be challenging from the regulatory perspective. For instance, AI system may be complex, and this complexity makes them challenging in terms of accountability, for instance. These systems are also opaque, so the fact that opacity is also related to complexity, but it's difficult to prove, for instance, causality, and this is some work that we have been doing. Those systems might be unpredictable to a certain extent. So those systems might be also autonomous or automated in some ways without human supervision. And finally, those systems are highly dependent on data. So these are the 5 characteristics that were designed or were identified to be particular of AI. Of course, not some of them are shared by other systems. For instance, automated decision-making systems that are not based on artificial intelligence might also be autonomous. But these are the 5 that were identified for the regulatory approach. And at the right, I put a little bit some of the challenges in terms of regulation. For instance, they might be risk to use this technology to human safety. For instance, if we use this technology in a safety relevant scenario, there might be risk to fundamental rights. There has been a lot of research about, for instance, the bias and discrimination, and this is linked to fundamental rights. There might be also challenges in enforcing regulation, also legal uncertainty for providers if there is no clear rules on how to deploy this technology. Also in the side of society, mistrust on the technology. Maybe we are not preventing the use because of mistrust, and also in the European context, a risk of regulatory fragmentation. So all of this was said to be shared across sectors, and that's why we opted for a regulation that is cross-sectorial. So it applies to, for instance, to different areas, education, to employment, for instance, or to other areas. So these are the two actually the two regulatory approaches where we are contributing to, which try to map in Europe define legal requirements based on the concepts of trustworthy AI. The first one, and maybe, I mean, I'm sure you have heard about, is the AI Act, which is a regulation that is focusing on products. So it's a product regulation. It's focusing on AI system, and it defines a series of, it is what we call a risk-based approach. So it defines different application domains and areas and different risk levels, and there are different requirements, like a subset of those trustworthy AI requirements that apply depending on the risk level. For instance, in minimal or no risk, such as the example of, for instance, music recommendation, there is no legal requirement for AI assistants to be deployed. In the case of unacceptable risk, there's a list of applications where the deployment of AI system is forbidden in the European Union. Then for high risk, that are those areas are permitted the use of AI, but subject to a series of legal requirements. I have listed there on the right. For instance, there are requirements for robustness, accuracy, and cybersecurity. For human oversight, that you see was one of the requirements. For transparency and information to user, that was the fourth requirement. For logging, that is also related to transparency. For data governance and risk management. So as you see, this the AI Act defines a subset of those requirements according to the risk level, and they are somehow related to the 7 requirements for trustworthy AI. The second regulatory framework that is related to trustworthy AI as a broader term is the Digital Services Act. Sorry, I forgot to say that the AI Act is currently under negotiation, very intense negotiation by European co-legislators, who are the European Commission, the Council, and the European Parliament, and it's still, the details of the regulation are still refined by co-legislators. So it's not a regulation that is still applied or entering into force, but is still in the making, let's say, so in the policy peer review process. The second regulatory framework, and this one is actually entering into force in 2023, is the Digital Services Act, which is applying to algorithms. In fact, it doesn't mention artificial intelligence, but algorithms, and many of those algorithms are now powered by artificial intelligence in the particular context of digital services and platforms, and in the particular usage of search and recommendation. So there are a series of provisions to different platforms, not based on risk, as we had in the AI Act, but based on size. And you have here a layer approach where you have requirements for a very large online platforms, online hosting services, intermediate service, and some of these requirements, of course, are related to the concept of trustworthy AI, such as, for instance, risk management, transparency of recommender systems and online advertisement, and or internal, external independent auditing and public accountability, and also, and this is very interesting for the research community, there is a requirement for very large online platforms and search engines to share data with authorities, but also to share data with researchers to carry out some studies on the systemic risk of those platforms. This is a regulation that started to be applied in 2020, and you may see some changes in the platforms and also some developments during the year. So just to say that the European Center for Algorithmic Transparency was born precisely to support this particular regulation, the Digital Services Act, because the European Commission has what is called like enforcement role. Is the enforcer of the regulation for very large online platforms and very large search engines. That means that instead of individual member state, is the Commission that is having this regulatory power, and the European Center for Algorithmic Transparency is acting as the in-house scientific and technical service to support this enforcement with a state-of-the-art know-how and expertise. So this center has different teams. As Dolores mentioned, I'm leading one of the teams, the one mostly doing research on systemic risk and impact of online platforms and the algorithms behind, and also doing networking or building community of researchers on that are studying what we call those systemic risks. And here you see the list of very large online platforms and search engines that were designated, and you see that many of them has they are all they have a huge societal impact, and there are many interesting research topics to be addressed in this context. So I wanted to now spend some time explaining or introducing some of the projects that we carried out in a very, very general way. So I know this might be very superficial, but I thought it was good to give you more an overview of the things that we do. We are now around, in my team, we are around 10 people, mostly senior researchers. So we don't have as the university setup where we have students. We only have 2 PhD students, but we have like 8 senior researchers, and then we have also some collaborators, external collaborators, and students that work with us in different projects. So I will explain you a little bit 4 of the topics that we have been working on, and on the scenarios, saying that we are mostly focusing on 4 different requirements of trustworthy AI. We are mostly focusing on the idea of transparency and documentation. We have worked a lot on fairness and diversity. We have also focused on the idea of human oversight, and finally on societal impact. So this is a little bit a subset of trustworthy AI. For instance, we don't work on cybersecurity, or we don't work much on robustness or on environmental impact. And we try to do this kind of analysis in different domains to have a broader understanding. So the first project I wanted to present you is about autonomous vehicles. We have been working on this we have a project on this particular context. It's led by David Fernandez Llorca, who was a professor at University of Alcalá de Henares in Madrid, and is now who joined our team and is now leading this area of work. And we did the first analysis in a project of the concept of trustworthy AI, how this applies to autonomous vehicles. So this is maybe the most complex kind of system, and this reveals also the complexity of the AI value chain, which is something that is very relevant for the assessment and for the evaluation. And here you see, for instance, a representation of the different components of an autonomous vehicles, and also the different algorithms or AI systems that might be integrated. So we did a report that was first a state of the art on that field, where we tried to address and see how mature is the research on those different 7 requirements. And here you see an example of the mapping. You see it's the 7 requirements, and then you see in colors. For instance, in dark blue, you see the critical and short-term requirements, and then in light blue, you see the long-term. And this reflects a bit the state-of-the-art research. So that means that, for instance, although there has been a lot of, I think, a lot of research on the top, which is technical robustness and safety, and much literature on that field, because, of course, for a vehicle, safety and robustness is the key issue to have it deployed. There has been not much research, for instance, on societal and environmental well-being, and there is few research, for instance, on fairness or transparency or human agency and oversight. So from that kind of state of the art, we did some analysis and also some considerations. For instance, one consideration that we see in our research is that when you define criteria for evaluation, for instance, in terms of trustworthiness, you always need to set up the stakeholder, or you always need to have a multi-stakeholder perspective for any evaluation or assessment you do for trustworthiness. For instance, in autonomous vehicles, okay, there is a pedestrians, and then there are the driver, and there might be contradictory needs and contradictory metrics if you want to ensure, for instance, fairness or transparency. So, for instance, in the sense of transparency, and here you have the concept of explainable AI for the visual for automated vehicles. Transparency should be different for authorities or for passengers or for external users, and also for drivers. So we need to always define evaluation metrics that take into account and sometimes contradictory objectives. And this is I mean, we did a very extensive report, for instance, on which are the barriers and the questions for the different layers, and in terms of explainability. And also a relevant aspect is which are the adequate logging practices, for instance, to recover information in case of accident or in case of incident. Another aspect or another conclusion from our study with the example of autonomous vehicles is that sometimes those concepts related to trustworthy AI are not really only on the system level. For instance, this is an example of the different aspects that one needs to take into account into this requirement: societal and environmental well-being. So sometimes it's not only system level, but there is a social, and that's why we call for socio-technical system, but there are many aspects to consider that do not depend on the system itself. The second scenario that I wanted to present is about facial processing, and in this area, biometric has been much discussed, and the source of a lot of discussion also in the policy side. Should we have which kind of risks are brought by biometric identification, by facial recognition, and which are the ways to evaluate those systems in a proper way. So, for instance, we did analysis of the landscape of facial processing applications by looking at scientific publications, for instance, to how those algorithms are evaluated, but not only at scientific publications, but also at products or companies, to indicate, okay, how are those algorithms used in products, and also trying to guess which are the risk levels and applications areas for that. This work was led by Isabel Yupon Torres, who is also in collaboration with some external collaborators and myself, who is also expert on this field. And this is an example of the landscape of computational tasks that we did for those applications. You have systems that do face detection or face recognition and facial expression recognition. There's a lot of problems also in the terminology that is used. And we worked also a lot on terminology, just to put the parentheses on terminology between technical jargon and also legal jargon. And then we see that those computational tasks are always evaluated, for instance, in specific data sets or with specific metrics, sometimes with different metrics, and but not considering the domain where they will be deployed. And this is an example of the applications that we mapped. For instance, these are different. IT is biometric identification, then BC is biometric characterization, and we have different applications, for instance, from access control to face mask detection, and then we track which are the computational tasks that are used, which are the areas, for instance, education, law enforcement, employment, and then we were also mapping products in terms of companies and so on. So you see, we try to check from the clinical also to the use of those systems in real world scenario. This paper was published in Scientific Reports. In here you have the URL and the information. We also designed some recommendation for the evaluation of facial processing systems. For instance, in terms of fairness, we are trying to contribute to data sets, and that there is more demographically balanced, because there is a huge imbalance in terms of the demographic characteristic into facial processing data set, and also between algorithms produced by small companies or big tech because of their access to data. We also discuss in this paper about the trade-off between accuracy and privacy, and the ideas of new technologies that can protect privacy for this, because this is a very sensitive scenario, and also on the need for more representative evaluation benchmarks that go beyond the concept of accuracy to other considerations from energy, fairness, explainability, and human oversight. One important lesson learned is that we need to look at the computational tasks in the real world scenario to see a little bit how to play around with different metrics, and also with the different evaluation criteria and the data set that we need to use for training. So the third scenario I wanted to put is on children. We have been working for I think for 6 years now with children, and we are trying to define what does it mean trustworthy AI for children. Children as vulnerable population, they are subject also to AI, because they are also a generation that is developing with this technology. And we have been doing this kind of work with children that you see in the screen. One is we are doing also some field studies with children and systems. For instance, we have done behavioral studies with robots and recommender systems and chatbots. We have done 3 or 4 studies, and then we also do this mapping of scientific literature, and trying to, we're doing now, for instance, an umbrella review, which is a review of systematic reviews on the impact of social media use on adolescents' mental well-being. And then we also do design and evaluation. So we collaborate with developers, and also we do some science for policy. This work is led by Vicky Carisi and Marina Escobar, who is a PhD student from Polytechnic of Valencia that is working with us. Some examples just of studies that we carried out. For instance, we did a study where a child was collaborating with a robot in solving a task, and then we tried to observe and then we conclude on the need to let the child interact or choose the interaction. So this is more on the interaction between children and robots. Then we did another study on the interaction between a group of children and a robot, also another on the perception of children. So you see, we try to understand a little bit, and this is more our human-computer interaction work on how to define trust, and how to define trust by a set of requirements, or set of requirements that were defined by the high-level expert group. We also did, that's an example, another paper, we did a mapping of the opportunities and risks of recommender systems, and then the areas where they are used. And we are further refining this work in the context of online platforms and social media to see a little bit how to minimize those risks and how to design systems that that prevent risk to children. And finally, in terms of design, we also applied the trustworthy AI requirements to the particular population of children and chatbots. And then we try to define concrete guide for developers to apply. For instance, okay, you need to communicate the children that they are interacting with a chatbot. And then we try to pilot this in a study that we are now analyzing the data, because we ran it before I think during the summer. Yeah. So we also do, sorry, this was some policy work. This is a report that we did on AI and the rights of the children, where we see, for instance, for policymakers, which are the maybe findings that we have that could be useful for them. Okay, that we need to have one example, we need to define AI as a strategic resource for children. When do we really need to use AI? When it's not needed? We need transparency measures that are child-friendly. We need to do more research to understand the short and long-term impact of those technologies. We need to evaluate also, as I said, for autonomous driving. Here is the same from the multiple perspective, for the perspective of the children, parents, and also the product developer. And we need to consider children differently, depending on their cognitive stage and then culture and also other considerations. And the last project I wanted to talk is about music domain. I have worked a lot in my career in the music domain, but over the last year, some research has focused, my research has focused on music and trustworthy AI music generation, because, sorry, music is traditionally considered as low or minimal risk to fundamental rights or safety, for instance, compared to law enforcement or to other areas like education. But music is much related to culture, emotions, and creativity. So there are many aspects we can study from the music domain related to the concept of trustworthy art. So as Dolores mentioned, I'm associated to the Music Technology Group from Pompeu Fabra University in Barcelona, and we have been researching on those topics. For instance, on the topic of fairness, we did a study with one of our students on gender bias in music platforms and how pre-existing gender bias that is present, for instance, in the data can be propagated or not by different algorithm approaches. For instance, we found differences between collaborative filtering and content-based approaches, which are different approaches for recommendation in music. So that's the idea of this evaluation, and we are trying to develop, we try to develop a way to evaluate if your algorithms is really perpetuating or mitigating bias, and be able to incorporate some measures for the minimization of bias. Transparency is also a requirement. It's very relevant for music. You may have heard a lot about now generative AI and how systems should be transparent towards listeners and towards creators. So we are working in a now also a systematic analysis of how transparency can be inserted into AI-powered music creation algorithms in this project, trying to see, and we have several papers on that topic, on the practical use of transparency in music generation. And finally, from fairness to diversity, we also have worked, or I have also contributed to a project that is trying to specify how diversity should be incorporated in recommender systems, in music recommender system, from the content part, and considering the content and the users. And this is very challenging project, but it's still more a formalization, and how we need to consider this diversity also in the whole process of the design of a system. So just to conclude, I mean, I guess you have grasped the complexity of the concept of trustworthy eyes. As I said, in our team, we have focusing mostly on this requirement, human agency, also on transparency, diversity, and societal. So these are only 4, but still very complex. And here I have put that some of them have a strong background research, like for instance, technical robustness. Some of them have some research, for instance, on transparency or fairness, and some of them are newly addressed by the community, at least from a scientific point of view. So this is a bit what I wanted to present today. I hope it was not too long. I think I have my timer here, and then I will stop sharing because I cannot see you. So I hope it's still you are still there, and I'm looking forward for a discussion.
Thank you so much, Emilia, for this very insightful presentation of the challenges that we have actually in the community. So for those of you in the audience, please let us know whether you would like to pose a question. We will give you the camera rights and the microphone rights. So you can raise your hand if you have any questions. So Christina, so Nuria, could you give the rights to Christina?
Yeah, Christina, I believe you can turn on your microphone now.
And my messy kitchen.
We can hear you now. Yes, Christina. Good to see you.
I hear Dolores now.
Yes, so yes, we can hear you, Christina.
Okay, yeah. I'll ask my question then. Can I first say thank you very much for putting on these NeEDS series. I find them absolutely fascinating. They're all brilliant. And it's really nice to see it balanced with something like Emilia's giving us today, that's sort of pointing out the socio-technical side of this system. I know we've been recently having a conversation on LinkedIn, which really kind of feeds into this. We need to think about the people who are going to be using our products, basically. We can't develop without thinking about that as we do it. So, and this is what this conversation is all about. What I wondered was, do you have any sort of formalized ways of working with communities? Do you have sort of like very formalized set structures that you have around that? Or is it dependent on the project that you're working on, the teams that you're working on? I mean, for instance, I've worked on some projects where we used a local health sciences network to help bring the people together. They had a way of doing it, but then in other circumstances, it's part of the funding that you're given, that you reach out and you try and get people together in communities by working with schools or whatever. So I was interested in that side of things, how you actually reach out to people.
Yes, it's a very, yeah, thanks for the question, Christina, and thanks for the comment. I think it's a very interesting question. And in our case, it might depend a lot of the project. For instance, if in this project with children, we have been engaging with because as we have this European perspective and we have the chance to be placed in 3 countries, we could engage with a community of teachers and also students and parents in these 3 countries. And sometimes we also engage with European networks like European School Net or other networks at the European level. And on another occasion, for instance, we were having a study on criminal justice where it was a particular study or with one specific region. So it really depends on the project. We don't have a much structured way to address the community, but it's very necessary, at least when you design a system, to engage with stakeholders from the beginning. So we do that for each project in particular.
Thank you very much for the answer, Emilia. Christina, I hope this is answering your question. Are there any other questions in the audience? Yes, so Emilio, I believe that you have the rights to share camera.
Yeah. Hi, Emilia. Very nice and interesting talk. I was wondering, in one of the problems, these autonomous vehicles and so on, you're exploring, or the European Union is exploring some regulations at an European level. My point is are we going to have a different regulation system than, for example, in the UK, like now that we are driving in the right and other countries in the left? So I mean, is the project an European project, or there are some expectations of having something worldwide?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, I'm not an expert on policy. So Emilio, from a scientist perspective, I mean, what I can tell you is that my impression is that, of course, the regulation in Europe can only be applied in Europe. So you cannot, we cannot, I mean, I'm very naive, so just disclaimer, I'm not the expert to that. But you know, if you have the AI Act will not apply in UK, for instance, it will not.
Okay.
There is a European regulation, so that not the different member states have a different regulation for the products based on AI. So it's an European regulation, but there is it will not apply to the US or to China or to UK. But there also, for instance, the UNESCO is defining some ethical guidelines that are broadly accepted by. So I'm aware that there are more international initiatives. At the moment, they are not regulatory approaches, but guidelines like the UNESCO, or for instance, the G7 also code of conduct so I would guess that there will be also regulations. Now there is a regulation in US, so there will be regulations coming into different parts of the world, and there should be some international agreement. But as I say, I just only aware that the regulation that the Commission enforces is in Europe. Of course, it's in only member states. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the answer, Emilia, and thank you very much for the question, Emilia. Are there any more questions from the audience? Well, Emilia, perhaps because it's my own interest. I'm from the team. We have talked about, you know, when we developed this fairness models, right? Models that try to enhance fairness. You have told us about, you know, the data sets normally coming from, say, outside the EU. Can you tell a little bit about that to the audience? Share your thoughts on that.
No, it's just that, I mean, when we did a study on fairness, we had a project on fairness on criminal justice more in the recidivism risk assessment in juvenile recidivism. And one thing I think we mentioned, Dolores, is that, of course, you need to have a data set that is representative of the context where you will apply this algorithm. Now, this is, for instance, in medicine, is very clear. If you do a medical trial with people from one ethnic group, maybe you need to check if this works for your particular context. So I see this as very similar. For instance, if you do an algorithm that is working based on data from a particular country or a particular setup, then you need to ensure that this is this can be extrapolated to other countries or other setups. So you need to make sure at least that the data set is representative to the context where you will apply this product, because otherwise there might be, by chance or by you haven't evaluated in the real world scenario, so you might be able to prevent that there is a difference in the statistical maybe distributions or in the behavior of the data in another context. So this is a bit, I think, the complexity of having data sets that are representative. If you can have universal data sets for certain problems, it might be possible. For certain problems that are very socially oriented or culturally oriented, it might be very hard or very challenging.
Thank you very much for the answer, Emilia. Are there any other questions from the audience? If not, we would like to thank you again very much for coming today. It has been a great presentation, and it has also given the community, new lines of research. And I'm sure that this recording will be having a lot of views from other people that couldn't join us today.
Yeah.
And for the audience, remember that we will be back next week again on Monday.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dolores. For me, it was a pleasure. And I also feel that we need to bring a little bit more the gap between the research community also and our policy makers and the policy cycle, because sometimes maybe the vocabulary we use is different, you know, and in this field, I think we need to outreach a lot also this more policy landscape. So yeah, it's an interesting area. So I think we need more people to also to engage in that. Yeah.
Yeah. So we hope that this recording will be another seed planted for that. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.